Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, beautiful Sunday afternoon. My name is Lissa Ballinger, and I am the Executive Director of the Resin Center for Herbert Bayer Studies in Aspen. Has anyone here been there yet? I'm saying yet. Yes, that's great. You just made my Sunday. The Resin Center for Herbert Bayer Studies is a museum that focuses on preserving and honoring the art of Herbert Bayer. And before I introduce my esteemed colleague, Austin Kerr, I have to say that I think one of the most interesting things as you look around this space where we are today, Herbert Bayer was responsible for doing the first and second restoration of the Wheeler Opera House. So the Wheeler Opera House, I hope you all have been to the tour that the Historical Society does about the Wheeler Opera House. It's an incredible museum and building. And the Opera House suffered 2 fires in 1912, and it had no ceiling, no roof. It was in total disrepair. And when Herbert Bayer came to Aspen in 1946, he was responsible for doing the first renovation and restoration, which is especially important based on our topic that I'm going to introduce next. And then he did the second restoration as well. So here you are, and it's had 7 million restorations since then. But we're in this space right now that is the product of major restoration and renovation, and something that we would not be here today without those forward-thinking thoughts. So we are all here today for a talk, which is repair the most radical design act of our time, with Austin? And I'm going to do a brief introduction of Austin, who he is a restorer. He's one of the world's most sought after restorers in collectible design pieces, and he is the official restorer of Design Miami. He has expertise in wood, stone, ceramic, and metal, and he works with architects, designers, contractors, private collectors, interior designers, galleries, insurers, and auction buyers. And I'm so excited to dive into this topic, and with the particular lens in which we're looking at this, through a design lens and through the radical act. So without further ado, I'm going to get started speaking with you, Austin. You grew up in a family furniture business in Texas. That was your beginnings. What was that environment like, and how did it shape your approach to restoration today?
Yes, thanks. I just want to first say thanks for inviting me to this conference. It's been a pleasure. So this particular picture frame here is an example of a piece that I painted when I was 6 years old. The picture frame itself, not the artwork. My family in Texas, where I grew up, we did antique reproduction furniture. So we made new furniture to look old. And I grew up, fortunately, in a house with creative people. My father ran the warehouse, developed the finishes, and designed the furniture. My mom ran the showroom. And around the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, I stopped going to the babysitter and started going to the warehouse during the summertime, and got to be exposed to craftsmen working with wood and with finishes, and it just became kind of a playground of creativity. And it gave me a very unique perspective to kind of see that firsthand, and those pieces being created and brought to fruition. And then my father was someone who was a very hands-on person and liked to do the remodeling of the house that we lived in himself, and invited the workers from the shop. So I was exposed to us doing the tile work and plumbing work and sheetrock and electrical and all of these different materials. I learned how they're manipulated, and their strengths and their weaknesses, and all that's kind of helped inform me when I'm working with different materials, and with the metal and the ceramics and all that type of stuff. So it really helped kind of informed my knowledge. And I was very fortunate to have some excellent teachers. Merced is an artist that worked for the family business. And when you're creating an antique reproduction furniture, a lot of people, when they're mimicking damage, they're using very predictable objects. People use like a chain, where they're slapping the piece with a chain, but it leaves a very predictable pattern that can be identified, and it doesn't come off convincing. And Merced would helped me understand you need to create a story behind the damage that you're creating on these pieces. So he would take an ice pick on a dining room table and start poking holes in the edge of the top and say, this is where the kid was sitting and he was angry because the food wasn't at the dinner table and started jabbing his fork into the top of the table. And so, seeing what it takes to create damage helps me understand as a restorer when I'm looking at a damage, what it took to get to that point. And I think that offers a very, very unique perspective.
And just a little side question, did you feel like from a young age you were always interested in repairing older things rather than building new things, or was it both?
I think it was both. I was a very curious person. I was always taking things apart, wanted to understand how they functioned. My alarm clock, I would take it apart and figure out what's going on the inside and rebuild it. So I was always a very curious person about materials and the functionality of them.
Great. I just want to make sure that everyone in the audience, because I think this is confusing for wherever you are in the world, what's the difference between restoration and conservation?
Yes, so restoration is about restoring the piece to its original look. So conservation is about preserving what is existing. So an example of conservation, if you have a piece with a veneer top and the veneer is lifting and there's some areas with the veneer that's chipped, you would not fill the chips on a conservation, but you would glue down the veneer. So you're just trying to maintain what was there. You are introducing some elements to it, but it's in an effort to conserve it. With restoration, and I can show you on the next slide here. So this is an example of restoration. This is a unique dining room table from Tom Dixon. He's an industrial designer based in London. This top was just too far gone. The finish had stains from oil. There's a black mark on the top side over there. This particular situation required removing all the finish and redoing it. For an example of this Lean Vitron mirror, this particular mirror is made by an artist in Paris in the 1950s, 1960s. Really, really sought after works. She's known as the poetess of metal. She created all these jewelry and jewelry boxes, but she actually invented this material called Talicel, which is essentially cellulose acetate, the same thing that eyeglass frames are made out of. And later this was brought into film, so they made film out of this and other materials. And when it's heated up, it becomes soft. And so if this mirror was placed somewhere near direct sunlight by a mirror, by a window, then sometimes the material can become soft and the screw that is the hanger on the back can come off and they can fall. And that's unfortunately what happened to this piece. So this is about preserving all the original elements. There's inlay pieces of glass on the tops of all these little fins. These particular mirrors auction and sell in galleries between $30,000 to $500,000. So they're very valuable pieces, and it takes a very careful hand. They're very, very delicate pieces.
I have two questions based on this. So first of all, how long would something like this conservation take you? I know it's an impossible question, but.
Sure. So this particular restoration I did in less than a week. I want to say it was probably about probably 4 full working days.
And when you conserve or restore something in the provenance, does the value change? How does that affect the value of the piece?
It can if the repair is done poorly or if it's very evident. I advocate for transparency, so I'm never trying to fully hide the piece. When you're doing conservation work, if you go to a museum and you see broken ceramic pieces, you can typically tell where they have fixed the pieces, and that's intentional to show what was the original artist's work and what was introduced to the piece later. So whenever you're working on these pieces, the trade-off is this goes in the garbage, right, or you try to fix it. So, yeah.
Okay, this is the big question, right? This is the bulk, this is the pith of this conversation. huge question. Do you consider restoration a radical act in today's design culture? Why?
Yes, so I think that it depends on how you're approaching the piece. There's a lot of restorers out there, I can't speak for the whole industry, but there's a lot of restorers that go into a restoration with the game plan of, here's a damage, fix it, and that's as far as their mind wants to go into the piece. I think what's a little more radical about how I approach the piece is I'm constantly doing research on the artist and their intention and the materials they're using, why they're using the materials, to really have a foundational knowledge about the piece. And then I bring that to the client and walk them through the restoration process and really try to help them understand the importance of what they have and give them good understanding of why I'm the right fit for the project. I think that it's a very different customer experience whenever you have someone that just comes and wants to just do the job versus really hearing you out, hearing your concerns, and I'm not just servicing the piece. I'm servicing the piece, I'm servicing the client, and I'm servicing the situation. So really trying to come at it from a holistic perspective. In the case of this Jean Rayer set here, so there's actually a pair of these armchairs, a sofa, and the coffee table, and this is probably valued in the neighborhood of $1 million to $1.5 million for this set.
These are amazing pieces.
Yes, so Jean Rayer is one of the most sought-after French designers, and so you can imagine a client doesn't want to just let anybody work on this piece and not really understand what's going on. So being able to answer questions and give context to what's going on is, I think, very important. In the case of this one, this piece had some caning that was damaged on the backs of the sofa and the chairs. So when it's outside of the scope of work that I take on, I liaise for the client, find them a vetted person that can assist in the repairs, and then oversee that and make sure that I'm standing with the client and the piece to follow it through.
Great. So yes, restoration in the way you do it is a radical act, is what I think I'm getting from that.
Yes.
So as a follow-up to that, in a world that we all are all very aware of and have heard a lot about this weekend, but a world driven by speed, consumption, and novelty, how does repair resist those values?
For me, when you're trying to assess a damage, and oftentimes when a damage happens, it's abrupt, and the client wants a solution immediately, and they just want to get it done and solved. And the way that I kind of resist some of those fast-paced dynamic that a lot of people in design have these days is my objective is really to find the root cause of the problem and advocate for the piece, be a good steward of these pieces. I think it's really essential to not just rush in there and take care of the piece and just move on. When I go to a job site, I'm reading the room when I get there. If it's a construction site, I'm looking, do people have protection on their feet in the house? Is the house disorganized or is it clean? What is the language the client's using? What is the emotional state of the client? All this is informing me before I even get to the piece, what the client's expectations are, what the dynamic of the environment is going to be like to work there, whether it's in the residence where I'm doing the work or if it's in my studio. And then I offer a very intentional time to hear all of their concerns and really validate and make sure that they feel heard, because in this process, it can be a very different scenario if you say you get a dent in your car and you call the insurance agent and they're just, yes, you're just another number. They're going to ship your car off to the cheapest place that can get it done. You don't know how this affects the value of your car afterwards. You don't know if you're going to have issues with the paint, and you're left with these questions and kind of bad taste of just the experience. In the case of this Bugatti armoire here, Carlo Bugatti is a designer based in Milan. He's since passed. This is the father of the owner of the maker of the Bugatti car. And he creates just these incredible detailed pieces. They have inlays of pewter and bone and hand-hammered brass details in them. And because of the intricacies, they often, when they get damaged, it kind of overlays onto different materials, and it makes complications the restoration's more complicated. So when this piece came to me, it was disassembled at the client's house in New York. It was brought to Miami to the new residence, and some of the details were broken on the top of the armoire, and it was in pieces and it wasn't numbered. This is a 140-year-old cabinet, and you could see just it was a very difficult build, and the fine art installer didn't know how to assemble it. So my scope was to fix the broken pieces and reinstall it. However, when it came to me and I saw a lot of bad repairs and some failing finishes in areas, to be a good steward of the piece, I called the client and said, hey, listen, there's these issues going on. Let me give you a proposal to fix what we originally intended, and I'm going to give you 3 tiers of additional time blocks, increasing in the amount of time to invest in this piece to get it preserved and hold the integrity of the piece better, and not delete the history of the piece, not remove the patina or make it look new, but just stabilize the piece. And they ultimately chose the highest tier because a lot of times when I'm working with these collectors, they appreciate the pieces. They may not fully understand all the information about them, but they are interested in them, and that's something that I really appreciate about the dynamic with collectors and designers that spec pieces like this.
And with something like this Bugatti piece, when it's shipped to you, when it's sent to you, do you know the whole provenance? Like, are you typically given, the life cycle, or is that ideal, but then you have to do more research? Like, so it was created 140 years ago for X family, et cetera, and then the provenance along the way, and how much does that affect things for you?
Yeah, so I think it's, I'm always kind of surprised sometimes when clients will give you a piece of great value and they don't even know, they don't express the gravity of the situation. So I'm always doing research. So I'll Google reverse image search the image of the piece and really try to find as much information as I can. This particular piece was quite fascinating. We found Carlo's handwriting on the bottom side of the base of the piece, and there's Italian writing written all over on components of it, and I think this is a unique piece. It's a bar cabinet, so it held a lot of weight, so there's a lot of forethought that went into making sure that it's stable and strong, and but it definitely affects the scope of the work when you're trying to really understand what you're working with.
What role does patience play in your practice?
Yes, I think that slowing down again and just really trying to understand and find the root cause of the problem. In my life, I've seen and experienced recurring issues that come up that just keep showing their face, and they're different topics, but they are rooted in the same cause. And slowing down and investing into finding that root cause typically disseminates all of those other issues. And so while the client may have a finish on a tabletop that's chipping, my goal is not to fix the chip. It's to find out why it's chipping, how are we going to prevent this from happening so this is not something that just keeps reoccurring.
I love this topic, ethics in restoration. So what ethical rules guide your choices, and how do they set the limit on your intervention?
Yeah, ethics is incredibly important when you're dealing with these caliber pieces. Whenever you have a piece that, for instance, like this Lena Bobardi desk here, this piece came, it had a very unusual top. I mean, to have this seam in the middle and this green, what looks like adhesive on there, that would tell me that top probably had leather or something on it, but when you get up close to it, you see it's held down by nails, and the nails are not evenly spaced. The surface was undulated, it was a very rough plywood, and all of that would transfer through the leather, and so this kind of tells me that's probably not the original material that would have been on there. So I reach out and consult with experts in the industry. I have friends that worked at auction houses that might be able to trace back the provenance and find previous images of it. In this particular case, I reached out to a very talented just knowledge bank of a person that deals in Brazilian design. Lina Bobardi is an architect and a designer, and we were able to track down the maker of this table and see that they oftentimes put an inset reverse painted glass top on their pieces. So in this particular case, it's really important for me to take a piece that I have no reference of what it's supposed to look like, and I'm telling people through my work, this is what it was supposed to look like, and it's a big responsibility to come through on that. I think another topic is I don't work on fakes or reproductions. The market is very, very saturated in that right now, and I just can't.
Have you seen more fakes than
Yes,
previous?
Brazilians have a lot of fakes, but there's just so much of it going around. I never want to contribute to the success of someone whose objective is to copy someone's work. I feel that knockoffs.
Hear, hear.
Yes, I feel that knockoffs are not just the theft of someone's design, but they're the theft of opportunity. Like, we all have an opportunity to create something unique and personalize it, and when we just copy someone's work, it's not good. And typically, it's never convincing.
Just in terms of your process, briefly, are you only working on one piece at a time, or do you have multiple projects going all the time?
So all the work is done by myself. I have an assistant, but it's more kind of helping me stay organized in the studio and helping doing some of the prep work. And so I'm typically taking on a couple pieces at a time, but I'm usually, booked out a month or 2 months in advance, and I take pieces on when I can work on them. So I don't like to just have pieces stagnantly sitting around. I think it's not good for the risk of having the pieces in the possession, but typically bouncing off of 2 to 3 pieces in the studio at a time is typical.
So you've described having a kind of dialogue with the pieces that you're working on, with the vintage pieces. What do you mean by that? And maybe can you give some examples of that speak to you through the wear and the patina?
Sure. So imagine you're standing in front of a desk that's 100 years old. This desk is going to communicate quite a bit of information to me. It might not to the average person, but I'm looking for things, if on the top of the desk when you're sitting at it, if on one side or on the other side there is kind of wear through the finishes or scratches, especially going kind of in towards the desk, this is going to tell me the person likely had a watch or they had jewelry on, and this is over time, over years, has been wearing through the finish. If they had one drawer that was like their go-to drawer, you're going to see a dark patina develop around one particular handle more than the others. If the piece on one or two sides has a lighter color tone of the wood, it's likely caused by UV light. So this tells me the piece was placed in a room where there was a window on one side. So there's a wealth of information that can get transferred just through looking at a piece. Even if you look in through the finish, sometimes you see these little squiggly swirl scratches in the wood. And this is from a dual orbital sander. So it's a sander that spins, but it also kind of oscillates. And when you have a heavier grit sandpaper, it leaves these little scratches. So if the piece is 100 years old, we didn't have compressors back then that would have ran a dual action sander. So that means at some point the piece has been stripped and refinished. So all of these things start to clue me in on
Your investigation work.
Yeah. And I think this example here, when it comes to, actually, I think this is for the next, I think the next question is about the patina.
So, yes, before we get any further,
Sure.
I think for everyone, for me, the difference, how do you describe patina and versus damage in plain language, and why is that distinction so important in your work?
Sure. So patina is earned history that you need to preserve. It takes time to do that. I grew up doing antique reproduction finishes, and while you can do those very convincingly, it's not able to be done in a way for mass-produced furniture in a way that's really going to convince people, and it's never going to quite read the same. So whenever you're looking at a piece like one of these, the Jean-Michel Franck chair that has this really unique patina on the leather of this chair, it's all covered in leather, or this Pierre Jeanneret kangaroo chair. This particular chair here, I took this image at Axel Vervoort's gallery in Antwerp. I don't think that there is anyone out there as good as Axel Vervoort that understands patina and the history. It really creates a soul for the piece. If you were to look at a brand new Porsche 911, it's an engineering feat. It's a beautiful car. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you looked at a 1960s 911 that has stickers that had memories attached to them that are sun faded, and it's got a crazed paint and chips and little dings in the car that show that piece's evidence of use and history, and you kind of wonder where that car has been, it creates a soul for the piece that's not present yet in a new Porsche. So Axel Vervoort captures pieces like this that have a very special patina to them. This chair here, the kangaroo chair, the black on there tells me this chair was likely owned by someone with very oily skin. The chair was probably in a very dirty environment where there was, it could have, although it's black, it doesn't mean that it's oil on there like from a mechanic shop, but it starts to stick to the dirt, and the grime starts to stick to it over time, and so it just makes it a more special piece. And there's
Are you finding yourself being a storyteller as you are doing these restorations? So, like for instance, what you just said, that oily skin, whatever. So you're visualizing the people. Is that sort of something that you go through, or is it very clinical?
Yeah, I think whenever you get a piece that has patina like these, it's a hidden story that just kind of becomes an adventure when you kind of get up close to it and look at it, and you're really going through the piece. And I just think I find it very enjoyable.
It's really heartening in some way to me that people still value these objects, and it's not about necessarily fitting in your perfect space in your home next to your TV, et cetera, that these are objects that are valued and that people seek you out to do this. Like, there's something deeply heartening to me about that process, and that there are people that care about the objects still, and the history and the stories that come out of them. It's an interesting idea. How do you think restored objects carry and transmit cultural memory on that note?
Yes, let me see here.
Where have you left the visible story or that history, because you feel like that is something that is important to leave?
Yes, I'm trying to find the right slide here. Yeah, so, I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time.
So how do you think restored objects carry and transmit cultural memory, and then share some sort of situation where you're leaving some of that history visible in the piece?
Yes, so this particular example here, this is a unique table by Giaponti that was exhibited at the Paris World Fair. It was as a contribution from Italy to one of the pavilions, and there was a lot of wear on the top that was inconsistent. It wasn't worn in an area or a place that would have been obvious or common for it to wear. So whenever I'm trying to preserve that cultural memory, I'm intentional about addressing only particular images. And kind of what makes my role unique is I get to pick and choose what damages I'm fixing. I'm not going to go into the piece and just start correcting everything and make the piece look new. I'm focused on just addressing the pieces that detract, that look distorted, and make the piece look less appealing to the eye. And it takes a trained eye to kind of understand that balance.
And there's a lot of subjectivity in that. You're making a lot of
Yes.
decisions based on your expertise. So so much trust with your clients that you're working with.
Yes, and I always want to have a dialogue with them and point out things that I feel that they might want to have fixed, and I explain why I wouldn't or I would address that, and just let them understand the trade-offs of doing that. So in this particular case, I don't have a final image yet here. I'll be posting this soon on my Instagram, the full process video. But we chose to leave this kind of light edge on the edge. That would be a consistent wear with, you know, a 90-year-old table. But these lighter marks in the top would not be consistent, and they don't add value to the piece.
Is there something, you know, do you have like your mark? Do your clients always know that, or do you, of course you know what you've restored, but do you have a particularity of your restoration? Like, do you feel like there's something that someone would know, oh, this is an Austin Kerr, or is it just the totality?
I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that my work kind of steps away and is not really a fingerprint on the piece. My intention is to make it look like really no one stepped in. I'm not trying to make it look perfect. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I want the piece to really speak for itself.
Love that. So your testimonials on your website, et cetera, on anyone who knows you, they read more like spiritual guidance and restoration. And I would love to deep dive into that topic with you, because I feel like this is a really important part of your work that you and I have talked about that I think is really interesting.
Thank you. So I have been told before, you know, do something as if you're doing it for God. And to me, that always seemed very overwhelming. It's you know, how could you possibly do something to that level? So I had a spiritual transformation a while back, and I started noticing, just even in day-to-day, you know, getting on the highway and all you know, just experiences in life, how many opportunities there are for tragedy to happen. But I felt very protected, and I started noticing it felt like someone was 10 steps ahead of me, making sure, you know, the path was clear, and I had, you know, a safe place to move forward. And my thought was, perhaps this is the mindset that I need to bring into my work with these pieces, you know, especially as I started moving into more and more valuable pieces. And, you know, for me, if we're created in the image of our Creator, we are creative people. And I view God's specialty as redemption. And I think that me working and redeeming these pieces is a way of participating in God's work and really trying to, you know, we get a scar from a tragedy, and our expectation is not reasonable for that scar to go away, but it oftentimes shapes how we move forward in the future, and it can change our trajectory of our life and our mission. And I think that going back to patina, you know, it's that scar, it's that evidence, it's that, you know, faded sticker on a Porsche that, you know, kind of gives credence to that versus everything looking perfectly new. So, and then I just think, you know, it reinforces the ethics behind what I'm doing.
Can you speak to your relationships with your clients?
Yes.
A little bit more. So when a client request conflicts with a piece of the artist's intent, I don't know how often that happens. If not, you know, I would imagine there are individual concerns for people who are bringing works to you. How do you deal with those?
I think a lot of times there's misconceptions about how a piece should be restored. There's a lot of, you know, DIY videos where everything's stripped and then refinished. That's like the first objective. And my dad, growing up, was always someone who really pushed me, don't strip it, don't strip it. Push and find a way of doing a localized repair. And I think that adds a lot of value to an experience to what I do today, where I'm not deleting that evidence of history. So when a client says, you know, oh, this this has a damage on the top, we need to strip it and redo it. You know, for instance, in this Bugatti, this center image here, this is a Bugatti desk that had a parchment top on it. And the parchment had it was blotchy black, it was very inconsistent, but it's natural to the material. And if it was cracked because the wood grew on the cabinet, it expanded and contracted. It was in New York with the different seasons, and it tore the parchment. It was almost like a 2-foot long crack in the parchment. And my objective is to help the client understand, hey, we can try to preserve this and not just swap it out for something new that's going to really drop the value of the piece and really preserve it. So I think that showing the options that are out there and educating the clients is really paramount. And then I think, like on these Lalonde sheeps, these are done by Xavier Lalonde. These are resin and epoxy. This one had a crack in the chest of it, and there were some other damages on the other two that I had. Just really building confidence in the material knowledge and the communication with the clients, I think really builds a level of trust. And I think one thing that I really enjoy is when you're working with these collectors, the repair transcends to something so much bigger than the repair itself. It creates communication, it creates dialogue and relationships and appreciation. Yes, so yeah, and it doesn't always have to be a vintage piece. This is a Martine Bass clock. This clock is a really cool piece. Martine Bass is an artist in Europe, and it's a little difficult to see in the image, but it's a TV screen is the clock, and it's a guy that looks like Zeus that draws the minute hand, and then after each minute he comes in and erases it and draws the new minute. It's a 12-hour loop of him just going through and doing that, and this is the grandfather clock is the name of this piece.
Unbelievable. So what advice would you give young designers about the value of working with what already exists?
I think that understanding that fast furniture is how I like to think of it, in the same vein as fast fashion. Restoration can really step in, and we can find creative ways of, bringing old pieces back to life and repurposing them. And I think that's very important today.
And I think something so interesting about what you're doing now is you're teaching, which is always sort of the next level of introducing and making sure that your skill set is passed on. Will you speak a little bit about your materials and design masterclass and what the goal of it is and who you're trying to reach and what your vision is for the future of this profession that you clearly love and are so invested in?
Yes. The online course that I have, it's just a self-paced online course called Materials and Design. The goal of the course is really just to give a foundational knowledge. I'll in the future be expanding upon with other additional courses that dive into more specific topics. But this course is to give a baseline knowledge of the different types of sealers and abrasives and just all the materials that are used in finishing, in this particular case, wood finishes. And that's just to kind of set that foundational knowledge, so when other courses go into more detail, there's a foundation there that I'm not having to explain as much. But I oftentimes see a designer, and let's use an example of, they're doing all the millwork in a house, and they pick white oak, and then they stain it black. And I'm not one of those people that thinks staining a wood a dark color is a crime. I think it's preference. But red oak has the same exact characteristics, the same grain pattern, the same texture as white oak, but it's quite a lot less expensive. So part of the material training is really to help people understand all of those choices have trade-offs. So that money that was spent on the white oak versus the red oak could be reallocated to something that actually impacts the space. They could be invested in art, accessories, things that can be more productive, that make the client more satisfied and enjoy their home even more. And I just find that there's a lot of lack of knowledge of why the design teams are choosing what they're choosing for materials. A lot of it's just kind of just a repeat of kind of using the same pieces or the same materials. It's in all the magazines, and it's kind of a bit out of habit. Yeah.
And this, you may just have answered this question, but the design community as a whole, do you feel if they had a stronger material literacy, what would that change?
I think it would change the communication, the time. There would be less waste. There would be less delays on the project. All of these things, when they spec the table and they apply the wrong finish, this leads to a lot of client frustrations. And I enjoy working on the pieces, but I can only work on one piece at a time. And my objective is really to try to have the biggest impact on the design community possible. And doing one piece at a time is a tough hill to climb. So my masterclass helps a lot of DIY people and makers and architects and designers that want to just inform their team. I have like corporate pricing and things like that if they wanted to do a whole group. And then more recently, this is a photo from last week in Toronto. Avenue Road Furniture is a multi-line showroom, and they had a company summit where they flew everybody in from Vancouver and Dallas and Miami and New York, and they have a property that's owned by the owner. It's just an incredible property about an hour north of Toronto, and brought out all the sales and customer satisfaction team up there. And Avenue Road stands out to me because they have the highest customer satisfaction expectation of most of the showrooms that I work with. They really want the customers to be happy. And they've heard about my masterclass, and I do their restorations for them. And so they brought me in, and I did a 3.5-hour teaching with the sales team of about 50 people. And then the next day, did another teaching for the warehouse team and the customer satisfaction team, where they had pieces in their warehouse that had were discontinued items that had damage. I would walk through, explain to them how this damage happened, how the finish is achieved, and how I would go about restoring it. And then I did a demonstration on actual restoration. And I think that when all of these teams are learning the process and what vocabulary not to use and which ones to use, how to understand the materials better, it just expedites, and you can problem solve and really keep the client's anxiety at bay, which is incredibly important. I think a big part of what I'm doing is psychological with the clients, because when they get showed an image of a damage prematurely that's not true to what it looks like in person, they're off the edge. And pulling them back up is incredibly difficult.
It was really fun. I got to take Austin and his wife around the Aspen Institute campus and show him all the restoration projects we've done. And then immediately, I was so excited because he started talking to me about materials, about marble, about what should be being done. It's really, it was so wonderful. But I think everyone probably in this audience, we all have something, I believe, that we're like, that would, I'd love to get this restored. And I'm sort of hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you're suggesting don't go DIY. What would be the process? What would you suggest to people about if they have an object that's very important to them, whether it has a lot of value? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest common mistake that I see in the DIY field is stripping the finish. Essentially, if the finish is not failed, if it's not flaking off, if there's not delaminating veneer, all the sealer that's on there is essentially has the finish built up, and it's basically primed and ready. You can just scuff it, clean it, and lightly sand it by hand, not sanding it all the way through, and then paint over it or do a different type of finish. There's a lot of ways of kind of going about the piece that doesn't involve stripping the piece, which is a really messy nightmare of a project. Many times I've had clients try to strip it, and then they're calling me up and like, I messed up. This is...
Right. And then they call you in to repair.
Yeah, so I think it's really just kind of being informed. One thing that I do on my Instagram is I show a lot of the process videos. So if you're interested in kind of seeing the process, those videos really I'm explaining in voiceover what I'm doing to the pieces and why, and I think it's very, very informative.
Don't throw it away, though. That's the big
Yeah.
thing. So we only have about 2 minutes left, and I'd love to hear what your impression is being here in Aspen. And Aspen has such a deep history and a restoration history that I just framed, even in the Wheeler Opera House. But what's been your impression, you know, being in Aspen specifically thinking about this, not in Miami, for instance, not in New York? Is there anything that you've noticed?
I've had a really incredible time. My wife and I have been able to go on some of these trails. This is my second time in Aspen, so I'm not an expert on Aspen, but I think the dialogue that we had at the Baylor about the exodus of people in the late 1800s and kind of the fragility of that and the need for preservation, I think really stood out. That's something that you can never really let your guard down on, and you know it's important to make sure that all these industries and the architecture and everything is really preserved and in a very thought out, you know, kind of how I was saying before, 10 steps ahead, really trying to anticipate anything that might come your way to really be proactive in restoring it. But it's been an incredible experience here.
Well, we're so happy you're here, and I'm going to drag you back to ask you a million questions. In the meantime, in lieu of an audience Q&A, we're doing a sort of more casual catch-up at DJ's Aspen Collective Gallery downstairs. So we hope that we will see you down there, and thank you so much for visiting with us, and we hope you ask lots of questions about restoration. Thank you so much.